Hi, I'm Kate Goldfarb, Assistant Professor of Cultural Anthropology at the University of Colorado, Boulder. And today I want to talk to you about underlying conditions, race, racism, and health. Recently, the CU Boulder BIPOC community put out a forceful statement entitled Campus in a Time of COVID-19, in which they highlighted the line, racism is a public health crisis. I want to talk about some of the ways that that is the case. I will argue today that race is a social construct, but at the same time, racism impacts health and well-being. So what are some of the ways in which this occurs? One might say that if race is a social construct, but has real health implications, doesn't that mean that race is a real thing? Now, racial and ethnic disparities in health remain persistent, and we see that more than ever in the time of COVID-19. But I will argue here that health outcomes differentiated by race do not indicate that races are innately distinct. Rather, the experience of racism is a negative pre-existing condition. So one example that's commonly cited is the fact that women of color tend to have lower birth weight babies than white women, even if we control for things like socioeconomic status and education. So Nancy Krieger, a social epidemiologist, highlights the ways in which race is a social construct with real biological consequences. So why do we say, first off, that race is a social construct? Race is a concept that emerged around the mid-18th century as an arbitrary classification based on superficial qualities, phenotypic qualities like skin color or shape of face and skull. And then what happened is that over time, people started to understand these superficial traits as pointing to fundamental biological differences between people. And then people started to attribute qualities and hierarchical valuation to these traits. Some were seen as better than others. But we see that race as a concept doesn't actually have real scientific basis. These qualities were, after all, arbitrarily chosen. They're phenotypic. They do correlate with geographical distribution. They correlate with ancestry. But there are no clear divisions or discontinuities between what we know today as racial categories. And in fact, we see that there is more genetic variability within groups that we understand as racial groups, more variability within those groups than between them. So what are some of the biological consequences of experiencing racism? Nancy Krieger calls this the chronic strain of everyday racism. This is a wear and a tear on the body and the soul. Everyday racism is a constant stressor, and constant stress impacts the release of stress hormones, which impact inflammatory processes in the body, which predispose people to high blood pressure and cardiovascular disease, diabetes, obesity, and impacts neuroendocrine function, which can prompt premature labor, as in the example I gave earlier. These health problems that stem from inflammatory processes are the same health problems that predispose people to worse outcomes if they become ill with COVID-19. The constant experience of micro and macroaggressions should be understood as a type of trauma, and trauma over the life course also predisposes people to a wide variety of health problems. For those interested, I encourage you to check out the Felitti et al. Article on the Adverse Childhood Experiences study. Stress and trauma can alter gene expression, which impacts, for instance, the way that stress hormones are produced. And these changes are actually heritable. They're epigenetic. So what are some of the ways then that racism impacts well-being beyond the purely physiological? I offered you voices from different times and places: W.B. Du Bois, Curie Davis, and Claudia Rankin. W.E.B. Du Bois wrote in 1903 the book The Souls of Black Folk, in which he posed a core question: how does it feel to be a problem? Du Bois was born in 1868, so he grew up during Reconstruction. He became a young man during Jim Crow, and he died the day before Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech. And in his work, he was responding to what he highlighted as the incompleteness of Reconstruction. The nation has not yet found peace from its sins. The freedman has not yet found in freedom his promised land. In his question, how does it feel to be a problem, Du Bois posed the concept of double consciousness. He writes, It is a peculiar sensation, this double consciousness, this sense of always looking at oneself through the eyes of others. One ever feels his two-ness, an American, a Negro, two souls, two thoughts, two unreconciled strivings. And it was precisely this concept of double consciousness that Martinique psychiatrist Frantz Fanon called a psychopathology of colonialism. There are other ways that we can understand how it feels to be a problem. And 16-year-old Kiri Davis produced a documentary in 2005 entitled A Girl Like Me, in which she answers this question.
Brown versus Board of Education, the famous case that desegregated schools in the 1950s, Dr. Kenneth Clark conducted a doll test with Black children. He asked them to choose between a Black doll and a white doll. In most instances, the majority of the children preferred the white doll. I decided to reconduct this test as Dr. Clark did to see how we've progressed since then. Can you show me the doll that you like best or that you'd like to play with?
This one. I like that one. This one.
That one?
This one. I like to play with this.
And can you show me the doll that is the nice doll? And why is that the nice doll?
She's white.
And can you show me the doll that looks bad? Okay. And can you and why does that look bad?
Because it's black.
And why do you think that's a nice doll?
Because she's white.
And can you give me the doll that looks like you? "15 out of the 21 children preferred the white doll."
In closing, I offer you one more perspective on how it feels to be a problem from Claudia Rankin's book, Citizen, an American Lyric. Rankin writes, "You were in the dark, in the car, watching the black-tarred street being swallowed by speed. He tells you that his dean is making him hire a person of color when there are so many great writers out there. You think maybe this is an experiment and you're being tested or retroactively insulted, and you've done something that communicates this is an okay conversation to be having. As usual, you drive straight through the moment with the expected backing off of what was previously said. It is not only that confrontation is headache producing, it is also that you have a destination that doesn't include acting like this moment isn't inhabitable, hasn't happened before, and the before isn't part of the now as the night darkens and the time shortens between where we are and where we are going. When you arrive in your driveway and turn off the car, you remain behind the wheel another 10 minutes. You fear the night is being locked in and coded on a cellular level and want time to function as a power wash. Sitting there staring at the closed garage door, you're reminded of a friend who once told you that there exists a medical term, John Henryism, for people exposed to stresses stemming from racism. They achieve themselves to death trying to dodge the buildup of erasure. Sherman James, the researcher who came up with the term, claimed the physiological costs were high. You hope by sitting in silence, you are bucking the trend." So in conclusion, we have talked about the ways in which the concept of race is based on superficial phenotypic qualities, but these qualities are taken as pointing to fundamental differences between people. Social values are then ascribed to those traits so that some are seen as better than others. And that is racism, which, although a social construct, has real biological consequences. Racism is a public health crisis. Racism is an underlying condition. Thank you.